to Alex Toth In Depth. This is Paul Fricke, cartoonist, comics professor, and Toth disciple. This is the program where we discuss Toth's work and influence on comics, character design, and visual storytelling. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube or to the podcast. Positive reviews really help. Check show notes for links. For daily Toth art posts on Instagram, follow at Alex Toth In Depth. And please tell a friend. This episode, we're going to do another Anatomy of a Page episode, this time focusing on Phantom of Pleasure Island, for which I got a request. This story was written by Gerry Boudreau, and for this episode, you'll get a twofer, 2 pages that I'll cover. And, if you're into podcasts, this will be a decent listen, and it will be augmented in the video. Now, I'm not sure what Boudreau put in the script or what was delineated there in terms of, page progression, panel progression, layout, whatever, but it's possible Toth rearranged elements within the whole story and within pages. I'm guessing he took liberties as he would do from time to time. So the page layout. This page focuses on the main elements. This is, many times, Toth will do a 6-panel grid, as we saw in the first Anatomy of a Page episode with his torpedo stories. He also did a lot of those in the Dell comics he drew in the 50s and 60s. And he found that while that was limiting at first, it could actually be a help. Throughout his career, and later especially, he liked to be more adventurous with his layouts, and he was here. And again, he focuses the eye on the main elements of the page. Very often in comics medium, when we're reading panel to panel, we'd start at the upper left, reading in the west, and then proceed to the right and down. But one can take advantage of the medium because it is graphic design in the service of narrative. You can, and a reader could look at the entire page and take it all in. That's what Toth was going for here. We're taking in all the different elements, and because there's such strong graphic elements throughout with the main figure, with the title, and then separate elements within the page, we're kind of taking it all in. We're not necessarily reading it panel by panel. Now, what if Toth laid it out in a more of a 6-panel grid? So on the left, you'll see what Toth ended up doing. And on the right, I did a mock-up of what Toth might have done with a more traditional storytelling method and layout method. Very often in comics, one will start with a long shot or an establishing shot. And it wouldn't have been unorthodox to show the main character right off the bat within this amusement park scenario, and then cut in a little closer for the second panel, leave plenty of room for the narration boxes, and then go in with narration and the title, and then switching to the threat of the shooter, and then the shot at the end of the panel. You can see it's a completely different effect the way Toth did it. There's nothing wrong with the 6-panel grid. It would have worked well had he done something like that, and the reader could follow along. But I just wanted to at least explore what that could have been, so we can see the strength of what Toth chose to do. Now, maybe this was out of boredom, or maybe it's because he just wants to try something new, but he's always looking for different ways to tell a story. So, toward that end, what is the point of view of this page? It is largely the shooter's point of view. In the first panel, we see the shooter coming through the hatch at the rooftop with the amusement park in the background and below. That establishes the threat of the shooter immediately, and even if we're getting narration of the private eye, that sets the tone right off the bat, as even though it's an amusement park, this is not a happy time. And while the private eye is looking to explore what's happening and why have there been so many shootings, we see the shooter is like ready for another strike. because of this point of view, and that's carried out throughout the rest of the page. We see the actions and the shooter's point of view throughout in the lower half of the page as they move across the rooftop and then take their shot. And in this page, the protagonist then, our hero, the private eye, Chafin, is the observer. Next, balloon and text placement. If, again, with words and pictures in comics, our eye is moving all across the page, and who knows where our eye is really going. We're probably going one direction and then another and bouncing around, and there's no way to control that. But there can be a semblance of order, whether you're talking about words and pictures or either or both together. In this case, we see that Toth has arranged the narration boxes from the upper left and then sweeping down in a curve or angle to the title, and then across to the lower left and across to or off the page. This leaves room, right, for the images that he wants to focus on to breathe in the first panel and then in the main figure of the entire thing. So it's pretty simple, but is not the standard top of the panel arrangement that one might use or could use in a 6-panel grid. Composition then. For this page, there is an arrangement and use of X, Y, and Z axes, horizontal, vertical, and diagonal. And there's a mixture of all three of these to add interest and dynamism to the page and to lead our eye across the page. For the horizontals, we see, the horizontal first panel, and then we also see that mirrored in the lower third with the horizontal tier of the shooter moving across the rooftop, and also in the final tier at the bottom. Those are the horizontals, the strong horizontals throughout. Verticals are with the funhouse on the right, leading our eye down and kind of enclosing that 6-panel grid in a unit. But the strongest vertical is with the main character. So with all the other horizontals and diagonals going on, that strong vertical, just because it's so different from the rest of it, really stands out. And then the diagonals are very strong throughout this page, with the hatch opening in the top of page 1, with the diagonal of the rifle, a diagonal mirrored in the word pleasure in the title, and then very strong in the rooftop and the word funhouse across the bottom, and then a little bit too on the angle of the rifle and the sound effect crack in the last panel. A very interesting arrangement of panels as Toth is guiding us through this page. The picture flow, another way to guide through the page. Our eye, if we don't follow the lettering exactly, and we probably do to some extent, but the picture flow brings us up and across with the hatch. The rifle brings us down to the title, across to the main figure, down with that strong vertical, over across, left to right, with the strong horizontal of the shooter on the rooftop, and then across again to the end of the page. So very strong flow picture-wise throughout this page. Toth was known for this, and he uses it to great effect. It simplifies the page, and he uses strong angles with the blacks to establish things and also to set a tone. And he also focuses the eye. There's a few different ways he does that here. One is those strong angles really, again, ground the page with these diagonal dynamics throughout. With the attire of the character, he's gone with a dark black suit and then drapes the whole character in that black. Now, he could have added all kinds of details within the character with a gray suit or with folds and other kinds of details of pockets and other things, but he doesn't. And because he simplifies that, again, it makes the figure stronger, right? It establishes the tone of the piece, but also it helps to focus our eye on subtleties, right? With the bow tie or the neck or the tilt of the head, the hand as he's smoking, the hand in the pocket. Uh, those are different ways we can use black to kind of guide our eye. If you remove certain details in general or with black, then the eye will go elsewhere. And then lastly, very solid black of the second to last panel as we see through the sights the victim about to be shot. And, horrifyingly, it's a child. Time and movement. This is the most interesting thing about this page in regards to how Toth laid it out. Comics are an interesting thing regarding time because one can read the page all at once as if the entire thing is taking place at once. But so there's a kind of a time and space thing going on. But then one can also segment off elements within the page in a variety of ways to kind of get the tick-tick clock kind of passage of time thing across. In the first panel, in this case, Toth uses that long horizontal panel to let it breathe a little bit. So while we're reading the text, our eye is kind of going across and lingering on that panel, and it takes as long as we'd like, but a long horizontal panel often will have our eye traveling across it and through it, and the time, we feel a different kind of passage of time that way. Later on, in the lower third, Toth uses on the rooftop the same background throughout 4 panels, and then the movement of the shooter is segmented out into 3 separate panels. The character moves across from the hatch that we see in the first panel, and then across to the edge of the roof, ready to take a shot. An interesting breakdown of time. But you'll see this. Different cartoonists, comics practitioners will use a single background, split it up with panels, and then have a character moving across. It's a completely different way of using time than Toth uses at the top of the panel by not breaking it down and then breaking it down. And then, of course, there's the tick-tick clock. The separate 6 panels in the lower half of the page where the character, the shooter, is moving across, but then we see the point of view of that character and the actions they take, and there's a kind of clicking time clock thing going on. A lot of different kinds of use of time and space throughout this. But because the main character is not established in a single panel and then close up in traditional methods, and because they are so dominant within the page, it's as if that character being superimposed over the entire page is taking the whole thing all at once, or is present while everything else is happening. So our focus is on that character as they're observing everything. The strong vertical is tying it together and making that the most important element on the page, and then encompassed throughout the time and the passage of time and all the actions taking place, what he's observing throughout the rest of the page. Very, very intriguing. And then there's a little tidbit. You'll see Toth in his work use a lot of action lines, and sometimes too many, defying, his less is more credo. But you'll not often see him use a kind of blur that he does on the leg. And I'm not sure why he does it here, but it's, again, a different kind of way to get across movement and the passage of time. And this is something that you would more often see in manga, and that has been incorporated in the West. And lastly on this page, Toth would encourage us to be lazy. Now, that sounds like the wrong kind of advice, right? And one can take it wrong. But in this case, he's saying be lazy in regards to not putting every detail in with the black spotting, but also be lazy in terms of the backgrounds. He's giving us just enough. Anytime we're working on a page, we've got to figure out how much space we have and what we have to get across on it. So you have to be very selective about what you put where and what gets how much space. allotted to it, that you only have a certain amount of real estate on that page. And here, he could have given us a more a broad view of the amusement park. He could have given us, all the details of that amusement park. And instead, because he wants us to focus on other things with the shooter, the main character, and then the action, he just gives us little hints of the background and into the environment. And again, they are not the main element of the page. There's just enough there to establish the scene and for us to know exactly what's going on, and to propel the rest of the story. We're seeing hints at the first panel. We're seeing the fun house, which is, again, a lazy, cheap way to do it. It's the rooftop, but we're not we're not unclear that we're at an amusement park and there's a fun house, and that the shooter is on top of the fun house, right? And then lastly, in the third to last panel, we do see, details of the amusement park with a merry-go-round ride, and he doesn't slough off that at all. So he's given us enough to know where the characters are, to know where the main character is, and to propel the rest of the story. But be lazy, sure, but be smart about it and put more time into the thinking. Have reasons for why, and choose where you will not be lazy. On to the second page. I just couldn't resist including this in this episode as well, because I had a hard time deciding which page to cover, 1 or 2, and decided to include both. So for page 2, now that everything else has been established, and he's an observer in the first page, in page 2, he is now the focus. The protagonist, the private eye, is the main thing going on, and he is an active participant throughout this page. It is laid out in a manner very similar to the first, in that there is a main dominant element with the character, in this case with the body of the victim, with this strong triangle composition, and all the other panels work in and around it. And again, there's that passage of time thing where all the actions taken after that are still informed by and the hero and the body, and we refer back to it as we're going through. It drives everything going on this page. That said, then the character, again, now being active, is all over this page. There are 8 different figures of this character in this page, and he's kind of working through the page as if it's a maze, right? He's starting to try to chase down the shooter, and we, like the main character, are kind of working our way through this page in a very unorthodox manner. The flow is very different from what you would see in like a 6 or 8 panel grid. Also, Toth has varied the size of his figures of the main character throughout, and that just adds visual interest. Things can get repetitive or boring if the character is the same size throughout. I'm not talking about something like Peanuts, because obviously comics can work very well that way. But if you're trying for something more dynamic or moving your point of view around more than to a page. So movement and flow on this page, again, like a maze, our eye is bouncing all around this page. There's many verticals, there's different angles, and there's different curves throughout the entire thing. And the eye, again, is bouncing around. Who knows exactly where our eye goes when we're reading it, but you can see the eye kind of darts up and down and across, looking up, down the roof, up across up and down, probably across a running figure, up and down with a figure climbing up the ladder, but then also a strong black vertical leading our eye across and down, and then angles across from middle right to lower left, and then sweeping across the lower tier. Some of the layout here is not my favorite. While the entire page is integrated and balloons from the last panel are kind of bleeding into the upper tier, ideally you won't want that. The eye could be drawn down below to the last panel, but most people are still going to go to the lower left and read the last tier. That's one thing we always have to watch. I'm not sure if Toth did it ideally here, but he did want a fully integrated page, so that's the choice he made. Black spotting and tone, again, a strength of Toth, and often in the black and white stories he did for Warren, and some later in his career, he did tone. Sometimes this was with cross-hatching, sometimes with craft tint or dew-a-shade, and sometimes with markers or wash, and I suspect this was with a wash. With it then, he gets a graphic balance, a balance of white, black, and tone throughout the page. Also, there are black bleeds. You'll see, when you're looking at a photo, very often, if it's a darker photo, figures in the foreground and elements of the background, the darker areas of the black will kind of bleed into another. The eye tends to separate those things out. And when we're drawing then, we separate those out and want to make sure that people know where figures start and stop. Toth kind of goes back to how our eye takes things in, or how it is captured by a photograph, and bleeds those things together. Now, the danger with that is if you aren't careful, you can't make out what's what. But if you leave enough a delineation or isolate certain things, like in this case, foot or highlights on a foot, or the outlines of a heel, you can make sure that there's some integrity to that figure. And despite what else is going on the rest of the page with backgrounds, other figures, elements, graphic design elements throughout, you can still separate that out. But you can see a variety of ways on this page. Toth is letting black bleed into one another. He is not putting rim lighting or highlights on arms in the middle of figures. He is not showing us a running foot. It just bleeds into the background of another black panel. And then there's also areas where he's using shadow to delineate things. Sometimes that will create depth, and other times he'll let that bleed. But look, and study Toth in this regard. What is he covering up? What is he choosing to black out? And then what is he keeping? Sometimes it's little bits, like a little bit of highlight around the top of a step or a stair. And other times it's little buttons on a sleeve that will pop out and give some definition without showing the edge of an arm, let's say, or of a sleeve. Also, one should know, reading the Toth Warren stuff and other books, is that often the editor, Bill Dubé, would decide to reverse out the lettering. He liked black narration boxes, and then would reverse the type out to white. Toth did not design or plan his pages that way in most cases, and did not like this switch. I don't always hate the results, but in this case, I do think that the addition of it either bleeds the page in too much to each other with so much black going on elsewhere in the page, and it doesn't give it a breather as much as it could. And I think those other black areas that Toth uses on figures in black backgrounds would stand out more were it not for those black narration boxes. But that's a minor side point. A very strong element within page 2 of this story is the body language. Some people call it acting. It could be posture, and gesture of a figure. But there's a lot of variety in the private eye's body language throughout this. In some cases, as in with the first panel, the main image, it's a tender, gentle kind of body language going on, and an expression. In most of the rest of the page, he's active as he's running and climbing and opening the hatch and so on and so forth. And then in the last two panels, again, more subtle as he's dealing with another character in the story. But there are little subtle things going on: tilts of the head, arch of the eyebrow, lighting a cigarette, all these kinds of things. There's just a great variety here, and Toth is just great at using acting to get across emotions and actions in a story. Boy, if we could all, strive for or get to where he would, even in some of our work, all comics and a lot of art would be better off. Again, looking more closely at the main image on page 2, it's very difficult to draw what he does with the victim of the shooting here. This could go badly very easily, with the legs and arms splayed. And it's not an easy thing to draw, and it's further not an easy thing to draw when it's draped with a cloth. But Toth just hits it on all cylinders here. It conveys exactly what it needs to convey, and it's a very difficult thing to pull off. And of course he does. That wraps up then this Anatomy of a Page episode. It's a good story. It holds up fairly well and is a good read. There are pacing problems at the end, I think. There's lots of dialogue, and it's too quick a wrap-up. But there's nice work throughout, and one can find it in a variety of places. Online, originally published in Creepy number 75, later on reprinted in Creepy number 139, an all-Toth issue, and then reprinted again in Creepy Presents Alex Toth, which was a Dark Horse publication that I think should still be available. So check it out, read up the rest of the story, analyze the rest of it, see what you think of it, and anything I'm saying here, I'd be happy to hear from you, either via email or in comments on YouTube or on Instagram. So please check it out and get back to me. That's all the time we're giving to this episode. This episode was edited by Max Paulin. This again is Paul Fricke for the Alex Toth In Depth program. Toth said, "Admitting to how little you know, how much there's still left to learn, is your key to learning for a lifetime. Until next time, go with Toth."